So, do dismissive avoidants expect their ex to move on? We're going to go through this in this video specifically, and I'm going to discuss three major reasons that would really affect this topic as a whole. So, the first thing that you really want to know is that dismissive avoidants don't tend to think too much about the future relative to relationships. And the reason being is that, and it's sort of this long-winded explanation here, but it's actually really interesting to unpack and to understand. And it's that our subconscious mind is constantly trying to pursue things that we've tied positive emotional associations to. And because dismissive avoidants in their childhood and upbringing experience a lot of neglect, they tend to tie negative emotional experiences to relationships. And so then our subconscious mind is constantly prioritizing these positive emotional association things in our lives, which essentially play a large role into what our top needs are. So for a dismissive avoidant, because romantic relationships sort of have a lot of negative feelings tied to them, they tend to fall quite far down the totem pole of what DAs prioritize in terms of their needs. Now, whatever needs we don't prioritize, we tend to not think about in the future too much. So let's say, for example, that somebody has a really high need around security, safety, comfort. They're often thinking about this a lot. Like, I'm going to get home and I'm going to be really comfortable. I'm going to turn on the fireplace. I'm going to wear cozy things. Or if somebody's really oriented towards security, they might go, okay, I'm going to pay my bills and then try to save this much money. And do I think I'm going to be okay in today's economy, and how will I deal with that? And their thoughts oscillate around their needs or spend a lot of time kind of revolving around their needs. Well, dismissive avoidance, because their needs tend to be things more related to comfort and security and learning and things of that nature, relationships usually are not in their top 4 or 5. And so they don't tend to think about the future too much when it comes to relationships as a general rule. Of course, there can be certain exceptions to this, especially if relationships play into security in a certain way or things of that nature. But as a general rule, it's not something DAs tend to really spend a lot of their free time thinking about, let alone thinking about the future of. So what ends up happening as a byproduct of this, and there's two other things very much relevant in this video to stay tuned for, but how this ends up affecting the dismissive avoidant is they tend to get into situations where when their ex moves on, especially if it was an ex that they had a lot of harmony with or really had a close relationship with, what ends up happening is when the ex finally does move on, usually dismissive avoidants are surprised. And I've had lots of conversations and client sessions over the years where dismissive avoidants have said things to me like, I always just thought we'd kind of go do our own thing and grow for a little bit. And then when we grew, we'd kind of come back together and get back together one day. Or things along the lines of, I always thought that we were sort of meant for each other long term, but the timing was off now. But now that they're dating somebody new, I guess I have to start moving on as well. And so dismissive avoidance, they tend to not really think about the future. So they're sort of holding on to like where the relationship was at. And if they said, oh, we're going to break up and then one day get back together, they might mean that on some level. But it's like saying, I'd love to take a vacation next year, with really thinking it through. Dismissive avoidants can say these things and they can emotionally mean them, but because they're not prioritizing these things according to their needs, not being very high for romantic relationships, it's like this whimsical thing, right? It's not something that if you hear a DA say that you should wait for forever, right? It's something that you should understand. They might think that would be a nice outcome, and they might sort of say that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're like here to show up and do the work and execute to make sure that happens, right? And so there's a big difference. So it's quite common that DAs will be surprised when their ex moves on, and this is reason number one. Reason number two is that dismissive avoidants, they really fear vulnerability. And so sometimes I'll see dismissive avoidants who actually are hoping that their ex will come back, but will not make the first move, right? They'll be too afraid. They'll sort of stay no contact. And they also fear commitment. So they may not want to reach out in case the relationship reignites too quickly. And then they're back in this romantic partnership right away. And so as a result of that, they may actually fantasize about their ex, especially if it's the phantom ex, which I have other videos on this channel about if you want to check out. But they may fantasize about their ex, and in their own sort of fantasy world, see a future with the ex, even if they're not actioning it or executing on that, like going after the ex or trying to pursue them or trying to learn about relationships so that they can show up better in relationships and hope that their ex does too. Like those things may not be happening, but that fear of vulnerability can really block them in from like taking action. And so they may sort of sometimes be tied to this idea that that's a possibility, only then to see that it doesn't work out. And as a result of that, you'll often see this dynamic unfold where it's like a DA can actually be surprised that their ex isn't there or isn't sticking around. Now, there's a third reason for this too. And by the way, if you are going through a breakup right now or a situationship has ended and you're trying to get out of that dynamic, there's a really great course you can check out for free for 14 days using the link in the description box below. And it's called the How to Heal from a Breakup course. And it applies to situationships, dating, old breakups, new breakups. It gives you exactly the tools you need to stop getting stuck in that grieving state and be able to move forward a lot more efficiently. Anyways, the third major thing that often keeps dismissive avoidance in this dynamic is that they're used to being in the avoidance side of relationships. So they're usually the ones used to sort of feeling like they're being chased throughout the course of a relationship. And because of that, they get programmed with that assumption. And so when the breakup happens and they think, oh, we might get back together one day, who knows? They're sort of assuming that if they're still in it, that their partner who they're used to seeing chase them and show up and put more of the effort in the vast majority of the time will, is also on the same page, because they're assuming, like, we tend to project from our perception. So we tend to think that other people are feeling what we're feeling or will do as we do. And so the DA in that place often thinks, well, if I'm still invested in a potential future, that person who was showing up a lot in the relationship with me is probably also feeling that same way. But that assumption can often lead to a surprise long term when the other individual is trying to move on and heal and do those things. And part of that can be trying to date other people. So yes, in conclusion, dismissive avoidance can be very surprised when their ex moves on. And those are three of the major reasons why. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider sharing it and subscribing to this channel. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.